Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar on polar voyages with Discover the World, where we're going to be delving into the remote and captivating Weddell Sea in Antarctica with our special guests. My name is William Gray. I'm a travel writer and photographer with a passion for wildlife and wild places. Leave me to sit quietly on a beach with a penguin colony for a few hours and I'd be a very happy man. I've worked with Discover the World for around 30 years now, and it's my pleasure to be hosting this evening's virtual journey deep into the Weddell Sea. In a moment, I'll be giving a short overview of polar expedition voyages in both Antarctica and the Arctic with Discover the World, just to give you a taste of the exciting range of destinations, ships, and itineraries, and activities, in fact, that they offer. But first, let me introduce you to our guests this evening. I'm delighted to welcome Saunders Carmichael-Brown, an award-winning digital and broadcast presenter and producer with a background in adventure travel, sports, and sustainability. Now, Saunders was part of the small media team on the Endurance 22 Antarctic expedition that found Sir Ernest Shackleton's Endurance shipwreck. And it was this team that broadcast the expedition journey to millions of viewers around the world, and in fact included the first ever TikTok live stream from Antarctica, and led to Saunders directing and producing a 3-part history documentary on Shackleton, narrated by Dan Snow. A feature documentary has since been commissioned by National Geographic, so lots to look forward to. Saunders will be telling us all about his amazing experiences in search of the Endurance. I asked him earlier if he could sum up the Weddell Sea in 3 words, and he came up with mysterious, encapsulating, and wildlife. So welcome, Saunders. We'll look forward to hearing your talk later. Our second special guest this evening, and following Saunders' presentation, delighted to welcome Mark Stratton. Now, I don't know many other travel journalists with itchier feet than Mark, so it's no surprise at all to discover that he's currently in Fiji. But he'll be slipping out of his grass skirt this evening and donning his virtual polar jacket to transport us to the great white continent. After 6 voyages to Antarctica and the sub-Antarctic islands, writing about subjects as diverse as whale science and kayaking in the Southern Ocean, it was only in 2022 that Mark first made it to the Weddell Sea. He says, being in the vicinity of where so many great expeditions were launched and the sense of remoteness was a humbling experience. Mark's 3 words to sum up the Weddell Sea: gritty, mythical, alive. 3 words, Mark, that I also think perfectly capture you in that photo. We'll round off this evening with a question and answer session where we'll be joined by Joe Segal. Joe joined Discover the World over 2 decades ago and is now their senior tailor-made travel specialist, with a wealth of experience and first-hand knowledge of the polar regions and small ship expedition voyages. Her travels have taken her, well, pretty much everywhere actually, but destinations like Iceland, Greenland, Spitsbergen, Antarctica, the Falklands, South Georgia, Canada, and Alaska all feature. Jo ranks being surrounded by thousands of king penguins and elephant seals on South Georgia as her standout moment, along with seeing polar bears on a beach right next to her zodiac in Spitsbergen. So a very warm welcome to all 3 of you. We'll catch up with you in a little while, but first, we've just made a short video just to get you in the mood for exploring the amazing polar regions. So a question many of you may be pondering this evening is, how do I choose between the Arctic and Antarctica? Well, first off, of course, you need to ask yourself, am I a penguin person? Antarctica's for you. Or am I a polar bear fan? In which case you need to head, of course, to the Arctic. But after that, it gets a little bit trickier. And you may well find that one polar voyage is never enough. Now, Discover the World have been offering voyages to the polar regions since 1984, when they launched their first holiday program under the banner of Arctic Experience. Their polar pedigree is reflected in their logo, which features the Arctic tern here, renowned, of course, for its epic annual migration from Antarctic to Arctic and back again, a round trip of some 22,000 miles. Now, with all those decades of experience behind them, Discover the World developed and refined an unrivaled collection of small ship expedition voyages. Not surprisingly, around Spitsbergen, the circumnavigation of Svalbard's largest island, is one of their most popular. Riven by deep fjords with huge glaciers glistening beneath snow-capped peaks, Spitsbergen is the realm of polar bear, walrus, Svalbard reindeer, and Arctic fox. Cruising beneath those towering seabird cliffs and exploring sheltered bays, you'll aim to reach prime polar bear habitat along the north and east coasts. As well as exploring by zodiac, the voyage features other optional activities such as sea kayaking and scuba diving. Also in the Arctic, you can navigate the Northwest Passage, that elusive route linking the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans via the Canadian Arctic, defeated explorers for centuries. You can follow in the wake of Viking settlers weaving through the fjords of Greenland. A voyage to the world's largest island also allows you to witness the timeless bond between the Inuit and the polar home. Search the tundra for that shaggy, fantastic looking prehistoric musk ox, or photograph here the head-spinning scenery of the vast fjord system known as Scoresby Sund in northeast Greenland. Quite a spectacular place. At the opposite pole, though, there's an equally diverse and tempting range of spectacular scenery, wildlife, and expedition voyages. A voyage to set sail for the Antarctic Peninsula could last just 10 days, or perhaps you could embark on a 3-week odyssey combining the peninsula, the Falklands, and this magical place, South Georgia. Rearing from the Southern Ocean in an arc of jagged peaks, South Georgia is home to 450,000 pairs of king penguins. Here's a few of them. They transform entire bays into vast penguin huddles fluffed up by shaggy brown chicks at the height of the breeding season. And dotted in amongst them there, you can see what look like boulders on the beach, but are actually enormous elephant seals. The Falklands, meanwhile, are great for bird watchers and have everything from cliff-top albatross colonies to sandy beaches peppered with penguins and seals. Also in Antarctica, you could be one of the lucky few to venture to the remote Weddell Sea, this vast swathe of ice-strewn ocean to the east of the Antarctic Peninsula. That's the subject for tonight's virtual voyage. Now, you can go to the Discover the World website and find out all about this small ship expedition voyage, this extraordinary destination. Just click on or search for Antarctic Peninsula and the Weddell Sea, and you can find out all about the itinerary there. Saunders will be a guest lecturer on the 24th of March 2024 departure aboard the Sylvia Earle here, operated by AE Expeditions, also known as Aurora Expeditions. And you'll also be able to meet Mark on this voyage too. Now, if you have any questions about this trip, please send them in now using the chat button on your screen, and Joe will be able to answer them for you in the Q&A at the end of this webinar. Now, while we're on this slide, I should mention that Discover the World picks its polar voyage partners rather, like AE Expeditions here, very carefully, working only with accredited operators dedicated to safe and environmentally responsible travel in the polar regions. They only use small vessels, carrying a maximum of 200 passengers, often a lot less than that, to minimize impact on the environment. And many of them, like the Sylvia Earle, are either 100% climate compensated or feature innovative technology. You'll notice the wonderful inverted bow on this ship, which is designed to increase efficiency and reduce pollution. As an independent tour operator, with travel specialists like Jo, who we'll meet later, her first-hand experience of the ships and destinations discover the world are in a unique position to offer you personalized, honest, and crucially, unbiased advice on the polar voyage that suits you best. They can match the best experience to each individual, no favoritism. You can trust them to choose the right operator for your once-in-a-lifetime voyage, navigate the range of cabins available to help you choose which optional activities to add, and so on. And by booking with them, you receive complete financial security, no surcharges, and emergency backup cover 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. As well as an exciting range of optional activities, such as sea kayaking, camping, snorkeling, a polar voyage also offers you a chance to take part in citizen science, fun interactive sessions where you can help with real-world scientific research. One day you might be surveying penguins or tracking the migratory behavior of whales. The next you could be mapping cloud patterns or measuring ocean temperatures in support of climate research. Well, I hope that's set the scene for this evening and given you a little bit of background on the range of destinations, ships, and activities that Discover the World offers. If you go to the Discover the World website, you can also find out about the latest special offers available, including savings of up to 20% on selected Antarctic and Arctic voyages with AE expeditions, if you book before the end of this month, plus £1,500 flight credit or no solo supplement on selected voyages. So please do head on to the website after this webinar and check out those offers. Now to the main events, or the first of the main events of this evening. I'm delighted to welcome back Saunders Carmichael-Brown, who will now be sharing his experiences of voyaging in Antarctica and his remarkable account of being part of the team that discovered Shackleton's Endurance shipwreck. Welcome back, Saunders. Over to you.
Thanks very much, William. A great introduction and just a really good example there of what is available to explore and where you can go far and beyond most places you could ever imagine seeing in a lifetime. So yeah, certainly a few places I'm going to be adding to my list for sure from that introduction. Now let me just share my screen and we can talk about what I would like to talk about. So let me just do that, share and hit that there. And hopefully you can see that. William, if you actually just give me a quick thumbs up that you can see that, then we're all good to go. I'm assuming it's fine. Okay, I'm assuming that's great. So let's crack on. So yes, thanks very much for the introduction, William. Really good to be here and be able to share my very unique and privileged experience that I had in the Weddell Sea. Well, it feels like a long time ago now, but really it was just last year, which is amazing to say. So if you did miss it, my name is Saunders Carmichael-Brown. I'm a presenter and producer by trade, working across a variety of areas from travel and lifestyle, branded projects, international sports, motorsports, a little bit of a jack of all trades, which I don't necessarily like to admit, but it is true. And there's a reason why I bring that up. I started behind the camera as a camera operator and editor, moving to expertise in producing digital and online content, directing, and then eventually stepping out in front of the camera as a digital and broadcast presenter. Now, there is a relevancy to why I'm giving you a bit of a history of my career. It's because it was this variety being the key word of expertise and experiences within my career that led me to be selected for a project that would see me join an expedition to Antarctica and visit somewhere that I, in all honesty, had absolutely dreamed of experiencing for as long as I can remember. And I'm sure there's people now on this webinar that have felt the same. They haven't quite got there yet, but it's always been somewhere they've been desperate to visit. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about that, my experience to the Weddell Sea and the expedition that I took part in. So let's start by meeting the team. So the aim of the Endurance 22 expedition was to locate and survey the shipwreck of Sir Ernest Shackleton's Endurance, a ship that was trapped by ice and sunk during the 1914 to 1917 trans-Antarctic expedition led by famed explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton. Now, the ship hadn't been seen since the day that it sunk. And with only diary entries, some very rough navigational reports and entries and from the original crew to go by, it was up to marine archaeologist Menson Bound and his team, Menson Bound being the man in the blue jacket right in the middle of the helipad there next to the chap in the orange. It was up to him to make a plan and return to the Weddell Sea in 2022 after a failed attempt actually a few years before in 2019, where as you always are in that region, you were at the mercy of the weather and the sea ice conditions, and unfortunately it was unfavorable for them in 2019, so they put together another plan to go back in 2022, which was where I joined them. So hopefully this video is going to play. In early February 22, the Endurance 22 expedition crew sets out from Cape Town, South Africa, on board the Agulhas 2. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why would you go to Antarctica? It'll be one of the longest routes you can take when you could just go from South America. Now, the SA Agulhas, which you're seeing on screen now, is a South African research government vessel. So it lives in Cape Town and it resupplies the South African and Antarctica science research bases and does things like what we were doing, an expedition, which is why we had to leave from Cape Town, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later. But that voyage, being able to cross the South Atlantic and into the Southern Ocean, was very much a huge part of the experience that I had. So yes, back to the story. The plan was to head to the Weddell Sea, one of the most inhospitable places on the planet, to find what is argued to be one of the hardest to reach shipwrecks in existence and one of the most desirable to find alongside the Titanic originally. Now, only 4 ships had ever been as deep into the Weddell Sea as we were hoping to get, one of which was the shipwreck that we were trying to find, the Endurance. So as you can probably imagine, it was a hugely ambitious project that had, if I'm being completely honest with you, far greater chance of failure than it did succeeding, mainly due to, similar to what I mentioned just shortly ago, the ever-changing ice conditions, the way the ice moves in this circular gyre around the Weddell Sea, the weather, of course, and the very harsh environment that the Weddell Sea is in trying to operate in those conditions. So the big question, why set out on such a challenge? Now, if you allow me, I'd love to go just briefly into the history of Shackleton and the Endurance expedition, and talk a little bit about that 1914 to 1917 expedition and how the ship got stuck and why it's become such an interesting part of history and why this expedition in 2022 was so desperate to find it, and how it kind of reignited the story of the polar explorers, including Shackleton, and brought it back to life in 2022, over 100 years afterwards. So I'm going to go through a little very brief history lesson on that story. So Ernest Shackleton, this is the man here himself, the boss, British-Irish polar explorer, known around the world for his role in multiple Antarctic expeditions, not just the trans-Antarctic expedition. But above all, he is known for his leadership when things didn't go to plan. And it was these leadership skills, they became widely known after the remarkable survival story of the 1914 to 1917 Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. So prior to this expedition, Shackleton had actually also been part of 2 other prior expeditions to Antarctica. He was a 3rd officer on Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery expedition in 1901. Anyone that's been up to Dundee might have been on board that ship, which is actually in the dry dock there, and you can go and learn about the history. And the next one was Shackleton's 1907 to 1909 Nimrod expedition, which saw him and 3 others reach further south than anyone had ever done before in an attempt to reach the South Pole. Unfortunately, though, having to turn back just 97 miles short of the South Pole itself. Now, bear in mind, this was 2 years before the great race of Amundsen and Scott to the South Pole. So you're starting to get an idea of who Shackleton was if you don't know, and why his legacy is very important in the Antarctic region and polar travel in general. But the true legacy of Shackleton came from that 1914 to 1917 expedition, where he and his crew set out to be the first to cross the continent of Antarctica from the Weddell Sea to the Ross Sea via the South Pole. Now, I want you to look at the screen now and take a good look at the ship, because you're going to see it in a very different light very shortly. But unfortunately, as a result of unprecedented ice cover that year, before the ship could even reach the ice shelf and land, so to speak, it got stuck in pack ice, drifting with the ice through the winter of 1915 and eventually being crushed and sinking beneath the surface. And what followed is what I and many others would say is possibly the greatest survival story of all time, especially polar survival. Shackleton and his crew had to survive on the ice for months and months. The crew marched towards open water and any form of safety, pulling the lifeboats. And in April 1916, almost 5 months after the crew had abandoned their ship, the ice broke up enough for them to try and use the lifeboats to reach the land of Elephant Island once a few other plans hadn't gone quite to plan. As I mentioned, this is a slightly abridged version of the story, so I'm just kind of cover off the main bits and then connect it with the expedition that I was on last year. Now, reaching Elephant Island was one thing, and although far less unpredictable than the sea ice, survival and rescue was very, very unlikely. There was very few people that even passed by that landmass, just a few whalers a couple times a season, so the idea of being rescued was very, very slim. So Shackleton led himself and 4 others on an 800-mile death-defying ocean voyage in one of the small lifeboats, the James Caird, to the whaling island of South Georgia, the last place that the Endurance crew had been and seen other people before heading towards the sea ice of the Weddell Sea. Now, to do that, to cross that 800 miles of the Southern Ocean, they had to experience hurricane weather. And what allowed them to get there was the true story of the true hero of the Endurance, not aside from Shackleton, the flawless navigation of Frank Worsley, one of the greatest navigators the world has ever seen. And it was his almost pinpoint accuracy in unbelievably tough conditions, not just that of being on the Weddell Sea and marking where the ship was when they actually sunk without any clear sunlight, using a sextant, which I'm sure if you've ever used one, having sunlight and a horizon, it can be quite important. He didn't have either, but also taking notes of their navigational points on the Southern Ocean in a small lifeboat in hurricane weather, and really not being that far off as well. So let's have just a quick look at the story as it goes on this map. So you can see there, and just I like using this map because it really shows how much time elapsed and how long they spent in each part of it. So December 5th, 1914, that's when they leave any form of civilization, the whaling station of Grytviken in South Georgia, and they sail into the pack ice in December 7th, 1914, very, very north beginning pack ice, far north than what most people would experience back then, and exceedingly far north than what we'd experience now. They drifted with the pack ice, trying to make it as close to land as they could. And in January 18, 1915, it's trapped by the ice. You can see how close they were actually to the ice shelf and being able to start their on land part of their expedition, but it didn't happen. Shackleton made a different call. February to October 1915, drifting with the pack ice, with the Endurance ship being stuck and locked within that ice, all the way to the point of November 21st, 1915, where eventually the Endurance is crushed enough by the ice and sinks beneath the surface for what they thought at the time never to be seen again. And you can see 1915 of November, April to 1916 is where Shackleton and the crew drift on the ice and then eventually sail to Elephant Island and then eventually make the 800 nautical miles to South Georgia for rescue. But reaching South Georgia was by far not the end of the journey. I know you're thinking, if you don't know the story, is how can they already survive all of this? How can they beat these conditions, be able to keep alive just on what they were eating and their spirit, their morale and everything? But when they finally reach South Georgia, they're on the wrong side of it. A navigational decision made in order not to miss South Georgia completely and end up halfway towards the South Atlantic and the rest of the Southern Ocean. They decided to pitch up in Harken Bay on the west side of the island, meaning they'd have to cross mountain ranges and glaciers to get back to the whaling station on the other side. Now, no one had done that before. They had very little mountaineering experience across them. In fact, one of the 3 that ended up crossing had no mountaineering experience, no equipment, not to mention the condition they must have been in after surviving on the ice and the seas for so long. But they managed to do it. Remarkable part of the story, Shackleton manages to get help with the whalers and eventually able to launch a rescue mission for the rest of the crew on Elephant Island. Now, as I mentioned, this is a hugely shortened version of the story, and there is so many little nuances and parts of the adventure and the experiences that really brings the polar world to life. You know, how they interacted with animals, how they were experiencing the weather and the cold, and the kind of the challenges of the Weddell Sea. You know, the diary entries are fantastic, and that's what I want to get into on the expedition next year with Aurora on the Sylvia Earle, to kind of take guests through that whole story bit by bit and really immerse them in the experiences in the locations that they happened. So yeah, Shackleton manages to rescue the crew, and yeah, very shortened version. I really heavily recommend reading up on the story of this expedition and the Endurance if you haven't already. Now, one of the most remarkable things of this story is that all 28 of the original Endurance crew survived, being rescued almost 18 months after the Endurance became stuck in the ice. Not even 18 months after they left the UK or left Punta Arenas when they kind of did some retrofitting to the ship. 18 months after it got stuck in the ice was when they were rescued. Now, there's one part of the story that I really like to mention. I think it's important, especially to me, and that is of the Ross Sea party. Because there was another crew on the other side of the continent in the Ross Sea who were leaving supply drops for Shackleton and his men across the continent towards the South Pole in order to kind of make the whole experience and expedition more efficient. Now, they were obviously completely unaware that the Endurance and the crew never made it to the ice shelf. And the Aurora crew, which is actually the ship that the Ross Sea party were on, aptly named, they had their own issues. They were stuck. They had rotor problems. They were stuck in the ice. A lot of their dogs died really early into the expedition. So they didn't have a good time. And they were actually rescued by a ship coming from, I think it was New Zealand, with Shackleton on board himself. So it just gives you an idea of the time they had to survive. Now, one of the reasons why I like bringing this up and giving it a mention is that not all of this crew did survive. 3 of them died, including a relative of mine, Victor Hayward, who is second in from the left on the top row of that picture, the rather dapper looking guy in the double-breasted suits and the strong haircut. So that's why I just like giving that a quick cursory mention as part of the story, because it is sometimes forgotten, but it's very important. Now, fast forward 107 years to 2022 and the Endurance 22 expedition, and this was the crew that took part in that. Now, as well as a shipwreck finding sub-team, which is effectively all of the crew you can see on screen in the orange there, they're the subsea team. Marine archaeologists and, of course, our media team, which are on the right-hand side, just behind the crew in the white. It's a helicopter pilot, so you'll see me with a great pair of sunglasses on, doing some sort of wide stance. I'm not sure what I was doing at the time, but yeah, that's me and the media team. But there was also some world-leading scientists and meteorologists on board, conducting science work and collecting weather data and ice data in a region where there is very little data in existence, purely because of the lack of people that go there, lack of scientists that are able to reach the deep Weddell Sea. Now, that data has already helped to contribute to climate science, to ice melt research, to shipbuilding for future polar vessels, and of course, weather forecasting as well. So it gives you an idea that it wasn't just about finding the shipwreck. The Endurance 22 expedition it was multi-purpose, and we really had a great crew on board to get as much from it as we could in terms of science and other findings. Now, this is the media team. This is my little crew of 6. Led by Natalie in the blue jacket there, one of the first female directors actually, to make any Antarctic documentaries. If you've seen the BBC documentary about the moving of the Bass Research Station, that was directed by herself. Now, our aim was, of course, to find the wreck as a media team, and document it in the best way we could. And that kind of happened in a variety of ways. We had a 3-part history documentary fronted by Dan Snow, which William mentioned about earlier. I was a producer director for that. We had a huge number of live TV and news interviews from the ship. We voyaged across the South Atlantic and Southern Ocean, and of course, deep into the Weddell Sea. We produced an abundance of social media content across a variety of platforms that would tell the story of the crew, the technology, the research, the science that was taking place, and share all of the day-to-day experiences of being in Antarctica. And I helped produce and present that content. And finally, there was the feature documentary of Finding the Shipwreck, which has since been commissioned by National Geographic and Disney, and has had 2 Oscar-winning directors assigned to it. The 2 Oscar-winning directors who worked on documentaries, including that of Free Solo, the fantastic climbing, the free climbing movie. Now, all of this was produced by a media team of just 6 people, and that included 24-hour filming of the search taking place for the shipwreck, and all of the science work taking place as well. So, as you can imagine, we were kept very, very busy indeed. Now, the expedition lasted 55 days, 31 of which were in the ice of the Weddell Sea as the search took place. As you can imagine, there were a number of challenges of working in Antarctic conditions. And you can see on screen here, that is the AUV, that is the amazing bit of kit that was used to search for the shipwreck. This is a looped video, so you'll be able to see it again. Shows you, this is it launching off the aft deck of the ship, diving down 3,000 meters to the bottom of the Weddell Sea in search of the Endurance shipwreck using side scan sonar technology. It was tethered to the ship and completely remote controlled from the back of the ship. So, no one on board, of course, as you can see. Now, just to talk about some of those conditions, to give you a flavor of what the journey to the Weddell Sea and what the Weddell Sea can kick up and the sort of experiences you can have. Now, we were coming from Cape Town, so we had a bit more of the Southern Ocean to deal with, sailing that treacherous and storm-ridden Southern Ocean, the roaring 40s, furious 50s, as they're called, and experiencing temperatures as low as -36 with wind chill once we reached the deep parts of the Weddell Sea. Now, as you can imagine, whilst making content and trying to tell the story of what was going on, just even operating cameras in those conditions can be a real challenge, both physically with static hands. When you're holding a camera, you're not necessarily moving your hands too much, something that is crucial to do in very low weather, very low temperatures like -36, for example. And then not being able to wear many layers of gloves while you're operating, because you are still trying to operate a camera that has very small buttons and twiddly knobs, that you have to constantly be changing in order to get the best shot and make sure the exposure and everything else is right. So you have that to deal with from a physical side, but then also the technology itself would freeze up and malfunction in the cold weather. So we had all sorts of methods to tackle this, layer after layer of very thin plumber-like gloves in order to sort of keep that heat in, but still make us able to use the cameras. Little techniques that we came up with, like taping heat packs to the back of camera screens so they wouldn't freeze up. And kind of things like that. But we were also operating a 24-hour work schedule covering the wreck search, which was ongoing day and night. It meant we had a lot of shift work in order to make sure we didn't miss a moment of the work going on under the surface and on the working deck, because of course the ship could have been found at any time. So we had to make sure we were there ready to capture that moment when it did. Now, other conditions we had to contend with were the lack of darkness, which really plays havoc on the body and the sleep patterns in a really stimulating and exciting way. If you haven't experienced the polar regions before, it's such a fascinating experience, being able to kind of feel that and to see how that changes your body and how late you're willing to stay up just because there's no darkness. But the ever-changing and unpredictable ice conditions in the Weddell Sea, with this gyre that moves the sea ice around. When you're on it, you feel static. You feel like you're not moving anywhere. But the reality is the sea ice is constantly drifting and not in a really predictable movement. It kind of moves all over the place. So we would drift as much as 9 miles a day in random directions. So as well as having things like village-sized ice floes and tubular icebergs to contend with, many times of which would block areas of the search box. It would mean we couldn't actually search in that area because all above it was covered by massive icebergs and ice floes. And of course, as it was a working ship, we were in shared bunk cabins, which also meant there was a kind of degree of lack of privacy, which really tested our patience and composure a little. None of these things that are thankfully something that you have to experience on these amazing ships when you go with expedition companies. But kind of on a working ship, these are something you have to deal with. But above all, I would say, challenge-wise, perhaps probably most unexpected beforehand, was the expedition and the search for the ship really, really challenged our relationship with hope and optimism. You know, there was so much invested in finding this shipwreck, so many news stories, so much coverage of what we were doing. We promised the world with all of the TV interviews and the broadcasts and all the social media that we were releasing every day, going right from the moment we left Cape Town onwards, going out to millions of engaged viewers across the globe. There was so much on it. And yeah, it really made it toyed with your optimism, because there were moments, I won't lie, where you kind of thought, are we even going to find this ship, or is this ship even here? The last time it was seen, it was sinking below the surface, and the only navigational guidance you have are what could be really inaccurate sextant readings. So you kind of ask yourself these questions. You put a lot of trust into the experts that have built the plan together. But that was a part of the conditions and the challenges that I hadn't necessarily expected, but were very, very, very prevalent. But thankfully, with only a few days left before having to turn back, we were rewarded with this view: the stern of the ship, the Polaris star, and the words endurance. And unbelievably, every time I say this, it still sends shivers down my spine. 100 years to the day and almost to the hour of when Shackleton was buried in South Georgia. There was something spiritual about it that almost felt like he was unlocking the ship for us, and allowing us to, as he on the 100-year anniversary of him being buried, we were able to uncover the ship and bring the story back to life. There was something very Shackleton about it, very showman-like, which is exactly what he was. And it was, yeah, it really, we couldn't believe it when we actually figured out the date, which we didn't figure out straight away. It was incredible that it all worked out that way. It still blows my mind, not just to the day, but it's almost to the hour. Just remarkable. And these were the images that we were delighted to see after such a long time searching, with very little, nothing to go with at that point. We'd scoured the ocean floor to find nothing for such a long time, just barely even any drop stones that have found themselves from the mainland into the sea. So it was remarkable to be able to find it and get this view. Just very, very special. So to now go into to talk about the highlights of the expedition, but more specifically the highlights of the Weddell Sea, which I'm really excited to kind of share with you, because it is such a unique part of the world. So to even begin, it feels very difficult talking about highlights, because outside of finding the ship, of course. But if I had to say, I would say that being able to work with a team of internationally based professionals was a huge reminder of the sort of incredible work that we can do and the achievements that can be made and had when working together for a shared goal. And I think sometimes it's important that we remind ourselves of that every day, because we have many challenges that face us as inhabitants of this planet, both politically and environmentally. And we're only going to be able to solve them by sharing minds and working together towards a shared goal. And that was something that I really felt happened on this expedition, and actually something I often feel about going on expeditions with Aurora, for example. I was in Northeast Greenland just a few weeks ago, and I really got probably the closest feeling to this working expedition that I've ever had on a ship before. But with all of these extra perks of it being like a great food, luxury ship, really talented expedition crew, all the Zodiac landings and the extra activities and everything, it's like, it really is, there is nothing else like it. I felt very privileged, and it did give me a strong feeling of remembering all these experiences I had last year. And similarly as well, I was learning every day. Every minute was an adventure, just like it is on Discover the World voyages and Aurora expeditions. You're learning something every day. Every minute's an adventure. It's completely encapsulating and completely fascinating. Another personal highlight that I will have to say is getting to tell the stories of all of the locations, the wildlife, and the science work that was taking place. Things like ice flow work, density research, ice cover research, capturing weather data, experiencing all the technical capabilities of an icebreaker, and fully immersing myself in all of the history of the legendary ship that we were trying to find, and of course its crew. And throughout the time in the Weddell Sea and the journey too, we're also lucky to get some really immersive experience and immerse ourselves in some of the incredible visual experiences that I honestly will never forget. And I'm so excited to be able to relive them and hopefully get them again next year on the Sylvia Earle. For example, seeing wildlife like Emperor Adelie and king penguins in such a proximity like this. This is obviously with a zoom lens. I'm not this close, just in order to protect the wildlife, but just being able to see them in such detail and be on the same level as them as well, on the place that they inhabit, and kind of watch them and see how interested they were in these very foreign species and being in their area so deep into the Weddell Sea. There's daily sightings of minke whales in the kind of pool that we created behind the ship, which was used to search for the shipwreck. And it created a kind of a breathing hole and a fishing hole for so much wildlife. Emperor penguins, minke whales, humpback whales, Weddell seals, just like this one, felt like they were endless. We saw probably maybe between 5 and 10 of them a day. Weddell seals and crab-eater seals, and also the odd leopard seal. One experience I'll never forget was watching from the ship a kind of 3-hour standoff between a group, kind of small colony of emperor penguins and a leopard seal, kind of trying to, not taking eyes of each other, who was going to make the first move. It was fascinating. It was watching wildlife, live in person, obviously not disturbing it, but being able to experience that from the distance was just, remarkable. I also love talking about the natural phenomena you see in polar regions. Anyone that's been to a polar region, I almost feel like there's something you see on every voyage. It doesn't matter whether it's north or south. There's always something, whether it's, kind of like a fog rainbow or particular things within the ice or things in the sky. This on screen now is a parhelion, which is formed by ice crystals in the atmosphere reflecting the light from the sun behind. A hugely amazing thing to be able to see. And this also is a completely unedited photo. This is just how we saw it on the day, which was just remarkable. And that was in the Weddell Sea. Thankfully, we did have to get all these experiences, and I'll be able to experience them all again, thankfully, on a slightly more luxurious ship than the ice-covered Agulhas, which you can see here. And I will be experiencing it on the Sylvia Earle, the remarkable technology-packed Sylvia Earle. And I was able to experience a voyage on this, on not this ship, but on one of Aurora's sister ships in Northeast Greenland just a few weeks ago, as I mentioned. And it was fantastic. It's beautifully smooth, even in the choppier waters. And there's so much to look forward to getting on board this ship in March 24th in 2024 for the Deep Weddell Sea expedition, and really getting the chance to experience these things again. And I have also been told that there are, I think William mentioned it just briefly, there are some incredible discounts and credits available for berths at the moment. So if you'd like to join me on this voyage, now is a great time to book on. I would love to meet you and be able to really immerse you and the other guests in the story of Shackleton and the endurance expedition and the endurance ship in the places where the experiences happened originally. The last highlight I'd like to add, and I want to add this because I think it's really relevant to Aurora expedition ships and Discover the World voyages, and it's the general ship life, the experience of meeting others, sharing stories, learning about different cultures, expertise, and lifestyles. This is on board the Agulhas, this kind of group setting you'll see here. There's a certain shared thinking, I think is the way to describe it, that I find levels us all when we're in remarkable locations or we're experiencing things that are truly unique. And I feel I got that again a couple of weeks ago in Northeast Greenland, and I know I'm going to get it again on the Sylvia Earle, and I'm really looking forward to experiencing that in Antarctica next year, hopefully with some of you watching this webinar. This is the team, as I mentioned. I had the privilege of being part of this team to retell the incredible stories of survival and exploration in a very unique way, being in the location of the Weddell Sea and South Georgia, eventually finding the lost shipwreck and broadcasting it to the world in the locations where the story happened. And that is what I would like to do. I would really like to share my experiences of that to people that might not have been there before, but also, as I briefly mentioned, connect the experience with those of explorers like Shackleton and the recently reborn endurance shipwreck, which will be lying beneath our feet in the Weddell Sea, 3,008 meters underneath the ice. The huge added benefit is getting to experience other parts of Antarctica that I haven't as well before, which I didn't get to on the Endurance 22 expedition, the peninsula, for example, the South Shetland Islands, and of course, what should be everybody's bucket list experience of crossing Drake's Passage. So maybe it's a good idea for me just to talk about a few of the ideas I've had around bringing the story to life on the Sylvia Earle. just to kind of give you an idea of the things that will be taking place, hopefully on the ship. You're not just not just speaking and presentations, but also maybe real immersive experiences to kind of get us all immersed in the history and the environments where those amazing events took place, where we can feel what the explorers of the time felt, experience the conditions, the wildlife, and much more. My sole aim really is to help try and curate a truly immersive experience that follows in the footsteps of some of history's greatest polar explorers, including Shackleton and the story of the Endurance ship. You know, that's through things like photography experiences, experiencing things that the Endurance crew did in the same locations, like hopefully playing football on the ice in order to pass time and keep morale up, potentially trying some of the food they brought with them, like pemmican, using a sextant, all these things to kind of connect, to help us all be closer connected to such an incredible part of polar history. So yeah, that's my plan. Thank you very much for listening to my story of my time on the Endurance 22 expedition. It was fascinating, and I can't wait to join the crew and the guests on the Sylvia Earle next year to talk more about that incredible story and really bring it back to life through these experiences. And with that, I'll hand back to you, Will.
Wow, thank you so much, Saunders. That was absolutely fascinating. It really is an extraordinary story, isn't it? And what an amazing experience to have been part of that wonderful expedition last year. I think you gave us a really amazing insight into that. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Okay, I'm now just going to actually, I should just mention at that point that I know a lot of our viewers have been sending in their questions, so thank you if you sent yours in already. We'll try and get through as many of them as we can in the Q&A session later, but please keep them coming. But first, I'm delighted to welcome back our second speaker for this evening, award-winning travel writer and photographer Mark Stratton, who will be telling us about his experiences of exploring the wonders of the Weddell Sea. As I mentioned earlier, Mark is in Fiji at the moment, so we're hoping that he will be able to get around the technical challenges that presents and talk to us now. Are you there, Mark?
I am indeed, William, and I'm just opening my screen presentation now. Apologies, or I should say Bula from Fiji, as they say, welcome. Can you see that? Yes, I think we're good. Bula from Fiji. If you can hear tropical bird sound, that's going to be quite incongruous to what I'm going to be talking about tonight, namely the expedition of Discover the World on one of Aurora Expedition's ships coming up next March 2024, of which I'll be on. Absolutely amazing and fascinating presentation there from Saunders. I'm just going to reduce my little image to a smaller amount. There we go. Fascinating. And it reminded me of a brilliant quote about Shackleton. It was said at the time, for scientific discovery, give me Scott. For speed and efficiency of travel, give me Amundsen. But when disaster strikes and all hope is gone, get down on your knees and pray for Shackleton. And well, there won't be quite so many, hopefully, desperate situations on the voyage coming up in 2024. But let me just say, this was my 6th time back in February 2023, so earlier this year, where I traveled on the Sylvia Earle ship with Aurora Expeditions, and in this case, Discover the World. And the first time I managed to get into the Weddell Sea. And it truly is a wonderful and different experience. It's a very mystical and exciting sea to be in, and obviously presented in the past great hazards to mariners. So let's show you what we're going to be doing. So the Antarctic Peninsula is basically where we're going to be heading. In the top left-hand corner of the image is Tierra del Fuego in Latin America, in Argentina. And for 2 days, you're going to sail from Ushuaia to get down to the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, which is this white finger of land coming up. This is the most northerly piece of land from Antarctic continent. And I'd say probably 95% plus of expeditions go to the west of this, which is called the Bellinghausen Sea, and explore classic sites along that peninsula. But you are going to get the opportunity to not just dip into the Bellinghausen Sea, but to head into the Weddell Sea, which Saunders has told you all about. It's a unique sea. The map on here shows Shackleton's route, which was a very long and circuitous route stuck in sea ice and eventually to be crushed where it says endurance search area. This is due to a unique current called the Weddell Sea gyre, which goes in a clockwise direction. We're going to, on this expedition in 2024, going to just dip into the peninsula, and it'll be to the far west of the peninsula, a piece of land known as the Graham Land. And we'll probably be heading for 3 or 4 days south, hopefully trying to get to the mystical Snow Hill Island, which I'm going to talk to you about during this presentation. So yes, so Shackleton will certainly be looming large on this trip. Here's his grave in South Georgia Island, which I had a great pleasure to visit, just because of the aura it projects. That's he died there in 1922 and is buried there. To the right of the screen, and somewhere we'll be getting very close to, if not stopping by at, is Elephant Island. It's a brooding and malevolent looking place for men to have spent 4.5 months upturned under a lifeboat. It's an extraordinary place. And that's the ship. Just in case you're interested in seeing it, this is the lifeboat boat, the James Caird, that Shackleton and the navigators in Worsley escaped from the wreck of the Endurance and eventually sailed up to South Georgia. And you can see that in Dulwich College. It's open once a week, sightings of that. It's a remarkable little boat. And well, things will be a little bit more comfortable back then. When they were making that voyage, they were suffering from chronic seasickness, terrible heavy seas. Their skin was covered in boils and malnutrition, just to name a few things. You won't be experiencing any of that on the Sylvia Earle. I sailed to Antarctica with the Sylvia Earle earlier this year, and it's an incredibly smooth sail. Very, very wonderful ship to be on, lots of fabulous amenities, and named after probably the world's most famous marine biologist, Sylvia Earle, Dr. Sylvia Earle, an American marine biologist. And so the expedition started with, the conditions were good. Sometimes the captain has to play around to get you into the Weddell Sea area. If there's too much ice blocking it, it might be a case of going to the Bellinghausen Sea on the western side of the Antarctic Peninsula and waiting until the sea ice clears a little bit. But we managed to go straight in, down the Antarctic Sound. We rounded the Antarctic Sound and started heading southwards. And the first thing I discovered was an unbelievable amount of Adelie penguins. There were tens and tens of thousands of them everywhere. And this is a great little penguin. And I had never seen so many. You just see occasional ones dotted around, small colonies on the Bellinghausen seaside and quite south. And one of the things you do on these voyages is you'll go twice a day, you'll go off on a Zodiac inflatable and you'll make landings, or you'll go for sea cruises. And we found it incredibly difficult. And this is around Paulette Island, one of the main islands we found, or well, one of the main islands that exist on the way down in the Weddell Sea. The beaches were so rammed with Adelie penguin colonies, it was just impossible to land. So we ended up doing cruises in the Zodiac inflatables along the shoreline. And literally everywhere you looked, there was an Adelie penguin wedged in a crevice of ice. It was quite crazy, but very, very photogenic. And they're a wonderful little penguin. They look like masked crusaders with their black heads and stripe. And every piece of sea ice. So you're going to encounter lots of sea ice in the Weddell Sea. That's what it's known for. This is a glacier. It's been worn quite smooth. And literally every glacier we came across had a Adelie penguin colony sitting on it. At times we watched at one stage a mass hunt of Adelie penguins heading out to provide food for their chicks. and there were tens of thousands of them in the water, and they do something called porpoising, whereby they bounce on the surface of the water too. It's supposed to be an anti-predator detection system, as well as a very efficient way of swimming fast. They're not the only penguins. The holy grail, of course, would be to see an emperor penguin, the world's largest penguin. And Saunders, in that capacity, is incredibly lucky, because I've never seen these yet on the expeditions I've made down to Antarctica. They're quite far south. They'll be around south of what we should be heading towards, Snow Hill Island. There is a colony south of there, but whether we can reach it and get down that far, and we're down to the captain. You will see chin straps. That's the penguin on the left. They're an incredibly feisty penguin. They're always fighting amongst each other. And to the right is the pugnacious Gentoo penguin. I love these penguins, watching them on their nests. They'll pick up their neighbors' stones and steal them for their own nests. And literally they'll be crossing and stealing each other's stones. They're a great fun species to see, and pretty widespread. But what will characterize this for your experience is seeing colossal icebergs, and particularly in the form of these flat top pieces of ice. And this piece of ice here, which is known as a tabular iceberg, is some 100 meters high. And I've seen pieces of ice 2-3 kilometers long. Why is it so prevalent in the Weddell Sea? Well, there is an ice shelf which runs down the western coastline down to the southern coastline of the Weddell Sea basin, known as the Larsen Ice Shelf. And Larsen A has virtually disappeared. Larsen B is pretty much gone. Larsen C is now collapsing. And so much so, in 2017, a piece of ice known as A68 broke away from Larsen C shelf, the size of Luxembourg. So there's some colossal sea ice to be seen. Larsen D is much further south. At the moment, that's relatively intact. And you're going to get these wonderful landscapes. You won't be quite in the depth of ice that Saunders' presentation showed on their endurance reconnaissance expedition, because that is much further south and very, very difficult ice to navigate in. And I'm sure nobody wants to end up being stuck for a few months in the Weddell Sea, although personally speaking, I wouldn't mind that at all. But you'll get these wonderful icescapes of gloopy plastic forming sea ice mixed with broken fragments of rounded glacial ice, and it's stunningly beautiful. And it's a really difficult job for a captain. So the ships have very, very experienced captains. They have to weave their way through this ice. It's not just glaciers, broken away glaciers and icebergs, but it's also about looking out for things called bergy bits, which are smaller chunks of ice, but they can still do damage to a hull if you hit them hard. So you'll be weaving your way through these ice flow systems. And it's a great time to be out on deck, because often you'll see you'll see animals laying around on the ice, particularly seals and leopard seals and penguins, etc. And it just delivers beautiful, transformative experiences of being, when the sun's out, you've got snowy headlands, you've got the shimmering ice, which is often very blue tinged due to spectral radiation patterns in the ice. It's a quite wonderful experience and very uplifting. So the average day, well, remember, this is not a let's say a 4,000 ship-sized crew. This is a small vessel. It's an expedition vessel, and you're going to be expeditionaries for the day, each day. In fact, twice a day. You go out in the morning and the afternoon, and you will feel the elements of how past navigators and past sailors have felt in the Weddell Sea. It can be very cold out on the water. You can get very wet. If it's a little choppy, you'll get waves coming over the bow of these vessels, but they're very, very stable. You have incredibly safe drivers. So you'll be going out twice a day. And it might just be a cruise. So you'll stay in the Zodiac, and you'll be getting to look at some of the beautiful ice landscapes and chunks of floating glacier, chunks of floating iceberg, and wildlife. And in this case, in the Weddell Sea, I was hugely fortunate to see these wonderful creatures. That's taken a little bit distant. I had my long lens on. These are obviously orca or killer whales. There's a couple of, well, there's 3 different ecotypes of killer whale in the Weddell Sea region called A, B, and C, and this is B, and these are the famed orca of Antarctica. The ones that you may have seen footage of this are known for their coordinated hunts on seals, whereby they'll line up, swimming, create a wave, and try to wash the seal off bits of ice. They're a remarkable creature to see, not easy to spot. And this is why I say to anybody who goes down to Antarctica, spend as much time as you can out on deck, rug up, get warm, get a cup of hot coffee or hot chocolate, and go out on deck and just spot, because the rewards come to those who spend more time outside. And in that case, seeing an orca is quite a marvelous experience. And so gradually we headed south. Excuse me. It took about 2.5 days to reach the top of Snow Hill Island. And there's a really, really wonderful area called the Naze, and these stark black sand volcanic beaches with ice washed up, a very, very beautiful landscape. And it was great to actually get off the ship. There is a gym on the ship, so you can keep fit, but it's great to actually get off and stretch your leg. And at the Naze, there's a great climb up to this high peak. You trudge through snow until you get to this bare earth top, and there's wonderful views back north along the Weddell Sea and out to James Ross Clark Island, which is very nearby. But it's to the south of the island, and I'm going to spend a little time on a story which is very little known compared to Shackleton. It's kind of lost in the aura of Shackleton's great mishap and adventure and escape. And that's of Otto Nordenskjöld. He was a Swedish scientist, and he wanted to go down between 1901, and it ended up stretching out to 1904, wanted to go down and overwinter in Antarctica to do some measurements, in particular by overwintering climate measurements, and also they were very keen geologists and earth scientists. And we had a chance. We managed to get to Snow Hill Island, which is something of a holy grail, and I hope that's what we'll be able to achieve in 2024, March. And this is the heart of Nordenskjöld. So they turned up here with building materials, prefabricated hut, and they built it around 1902. And they set up for the winter. There was Nordenskjöld and 5 other men sharing this very small hut. And today, quite marvelously, it's still in incredibly great condition. And you'll get a chance to see that and go inside it. The blue toweling has been put down to absorb any moisture because everything inside is wood. But it's very, very well preserved. And you can almost imagine these men spending a very harsh winter. That harsh winter was March to October, which is the winter season in Antarctica, March to October 1902. And at the moment, there are some, I'll go back actually. So there's some Argentinian conservators were working on that. And they told me when I arrived, so they were doing some renovation work around the property and shoring up the ground it's sitting on, that they'd only seen 5 ships all winter reaching this hut. So it's a very special place to get to, just emphasizing how remote the Weddell Sea voyages and how few vessels actually tackle getting down there. That's why it's so exciting. Here's a very grainy picture of Nordenskjöld actually on his microscope in the hut doing this science. So they had this wonderful winter. Everything was going well, 1902, October. And by that stage, a ship called, this is actually what the land around the hut. It's this great mudstone canyon, and you'll see to your right Ammonites gigantus, which is its fossil landscape, and they were analyzing the fossils, and we were finding these fossils just everywhere. Of course, you can't bring them back. You're not allowed to remove any material from Antarctica, but it was an incredibly interesting exploration following in the footsteps of this science team. So they got to October 1902, and by now it's the start of summer, and they're waiting for to be collected by the ship that dropped them off, which is called the Antarctic. The Antarctic sailed south, and it reached Unfortunately, though, there was a great blockade of summer ice. So they were unable to sail down to Snow Hill Island. What they did was they sent out 3 men to hike over land, over the ice, to tell Northern Skald, look, you've got to abandon the hut and walk north because the ship can't get through to pick you up. Unfortunately, those 3 men found initially there was ice, which they were able to walk on, but then there was open water below this ice band closer to Snow Hill Island. And they ended up stuck, and they ended up building themselves a little hut, not this one, a little small hut, and they had to overwinter into 1903 themselves. Then the Antarctic ship, which was waiting for them to come back, got crushed by the ice, and it sank. And the captain of the ship, Larsen, took the men off and took them to a place called Paulet Island. And that hut still exists today. They ended up overwintering as well. This is the Larsen hut. So there was some 20 men inside this hut. It would have been very cozy, probably quite smelly because they were slaughtering penguins, and all the penguins are hanging around it today, much safer than it was back then, and seals. And they existed on that and some ship's rations throughout winter. So we've got this situation by the end of the 1903 winter season of you've got 3 different groups from the same expedition spread all around the Weddell Sea area, around close to Graham Land, and they have absolutely no communications whatsoever. It's a disaster in the making. Meanwhile, Northern Skald back on Snow Hill Island, they're thinking, where the hell are they? And they're about to spend their second winter. Fortunately, with Northern Skald, they had an Argentinian officer, and the Argentinian Navy, summer, at the beginning of summer, late 1903, they actually dispatched a ship called the Uruguay to go and look for their man who was with Northern Skald. At that time, they got through. It was ice-free. They made it down to Snow Hill at that stage. The Hope Bay trio, the 3 men who got stuck, they managed to hike down there. And Larsen and his remaining men had one of these lifeboats, and they managed to row 160 kilometers down to the area of Snow Hill Island, where they all met up at the same time with the ship. And miraculously, they were all survived, and they made it back to Buenos Aires in early 1904. If you can hear tropical parrots, just ignore them. They're right outside my window and making a bit of a squawk at the moment. I learned quite a lot about that in this wonderful expedition theatre where we have lectures and daily briefings on the Sylvia Earle ship. It looks like the deck from Star Trek. It's very modern, but there were lectures all the time on board to keep you entertained, particularly on longer sea days. And that can be from geology to wildlife to ecology to climate change and of course, history. And you're not going to be eating seal or penguin or anything of that ilk on the ship. It's extremely comfortable. There's a couple of restaurant outlets, very, very fine cook team, a domestic team who are cooking. And I had some really great meals there. And it's great when you come back, you've been out on a really, really cold trip on the Zodiac. You come back in and you warm up, you have a drink, you have a hot drink, and there's usually snacks and afternoon tea laid out, etc. So it's very, very comfortable. But what really sold the Sylvia Earle to me as a vessel, and I'm very passionate about this, is the capacity to do citizen science. I believe every vessel that goes down to Antarctica should have an active citizen science program. And that can be all sorts of studies like NASA cloud survey, for instance, and a seabird survey, or analyzing zooplankton. And the Sylvia Earle is one of the first ships heading down to the Antarctica, the polar regions, to have a dedicated science lab. And there will be an active program of citizen science. on board. And in particular, we used it for, oh, that's a slightly squashed image. Anyway, these people haven't been squashed by a giant elephant seal, but this is on Deception Island, and we were carrying out Deception Island. We will pass by Deception Island for sure to get down towards the Weddell Sea. They're carrying out a microplastics survey, obviously the scourge of our ocean these days, and unfortunately, microplastics have been found in Antarctica. We carried out a survey there, and any suspect looking pieces were taken back to the laboratory to be analysed. And we did find a few white pieces, but they turned out under a microscope to be bone. And this is, it's so important to use this facility and to get involved with the science, and also with the ambition of having scientist groups, of which I've travelled to Antarctica before, having scientists on board. It costs them a fortune to do research. So with them on board and able, sort of piggybacking their way down to Antarctica is a really great thing and a very positive thing for the Antarctic cruise industry. Of course, you may be thinking, well, I've seen pictures from the other side of the peninsula, the Antarctic peninsula, the Bellinghausen Sea. And this voyage shares journeys to that side of the peninsula, the west side of the Antarctic peninsula, as well as the eastern Weddell Sea side. And there are some truly classic sites, weather permitting. Will give you a chance to really dip into some of these sites. And one of my favorites is Necco Harbour. I love this place. It's a fantastic place to see humpback whales. They come in seeking the zooplankton and krill and feed, and you'll see them breaching, because by this stage, late in March, they'll be ready to be migrating back to the mid-latitudes, and they'll certainly be full of energy, well-fed on Antarctic krill. This is a great height at Necco Harbour, whereby you look down on this calving glass there, and it always breaks up. And this shot was taken 2 years by me from the same spot, more or less. And it's retreated. You can see it's retreated. And you can see on the right-hand side of the image, a great cloud of an avalanche as another calving piece fell in. And that white water is a small mini tidal wave, which was pretty spectacular to watch. Fortunately, there was none of the kayakers in the water at the time. I've actually been in a kayak down in Antarctica when a calving incident happened. You just point your kayak towards the water and you ride it out, and it's pretty stable. They're very stable kayaks. So if you love kayaking or really want to get up close and personal to wildlife, it's something you can sign up for when you're on board. And here we are. There's a kayak team here getting very close to some crab eater seals, who I can definitely say are not the least bit bothered by your presence. And I took this shot myself from a kayak some years ago. This is a Weddell seal, and Weddell named after James Weddell, who also gives his name to the sea. It's rather ironic. These beautiful creatures were mercilessly hunted by Weddell and his ilk. They were whalers and sealers. But today the populations are extremely healthy. And there's a great chance to get really close to the bird life. This is a southern giant petrel, and you'll see those frequently menacing penguin colonies trying to steal their chicks and eggs. It's a very visceral, high definition movie, and it's compelling. And I think Saunders said the best thing is just spending time watching one group of wildlife, watching how they interact and watching how they go about their incredible lives. Another wonderful site you may tuck into in the Bellinghausen seaside is Damoy Point. It was a blue sky day when I was there last February, and we were able to walk 3 or 4 kilometers in the snow to see a Gentoo penguin colony. Again, uplifting, inspiring visual landscapes. And everybody goes to this place. This is Port Lockroy Post Office. There's a British post office there, obviously the most southerly post office in the world, and it hasn't been closed by government cutbacks, which is great, because you can mail your postcards and letters all over the world and buy some hugely expensive souvenirs. It's manned by a team of 6 volunteers. And it's a wonderful place, and it's attached to something called Base A, and Base A is the original British Antarctic Survey base, and it's now a museum attached to the post office, and it just looks like the men have got up and left that very morning. And well, there's one more rites of passage thing to do. Whether you throw yourself off the back of the ship in the Weddell Sea or the Bellinghausen Sea, it's called the polar plunge. I myself have jumped off a few times into 0.5 to 1 degree centigrade cold water. Obviously, if it's any lower, you're going to hit ice because I'll be freezing. But it's a terrific experience, an exhilarating experience. But it's not for everybody, so that's not compulsory. But it's very much a rites of passage experience. Look, I'm going to end on this, and what I'm going to say is, if you have been to Antarctica before, this is a totally different experience going into the Weddell Sea for some of the experiences Saunders and I have pointed out. If you haven't been before, well, you get the chance to actually crack the Weddell Sea and the Bellinghausen Sea on one trip, and that's something really to tell your friends. So I just want to say thank you very much for listening. And as we say down here in the South Pacific, on Fiji, Vinaka, thank you.
Mark, thank you so much. Another wonderful talk. It really is an extraordinary place, isn't it? And I think you so vividly brought to life what it's like to actually travel down there on one of these small ship expedition voyages. Incredible sights, the incredible light, the wonderful wildlife, and another extraordinary tale of exploration and history to uncover down there as well. So thank you very much. I hope it's cooled you down slightly in Fiji. Right, well, I'd now like to welcome back Saunders and Joe from Discover the World for our question and answer session. You're all there, that's brilliant. Perhaps I could kick things off with you, Joe, and ask you what your most memorable experience is from traveling in Antarctica.
There's so many to choose from. It's one of the most amazing places I've ever been, and I've been lucky enough to go twice. So I did the classic Antarctica first, and then I've done Falklands and South Georgia. So I think for me, the first trip to Antarctica was it just blew my mind going there. So one of my main things that I just clearly remember was actually right near Port Lockroy. And a penguin just came up, and I looked down. He was just chewing the zip on my trousers. And there's a rule: you're not supposed to go near them, but they don't know that rule. And that he was just literally right by my foot eating the zip, and yeah, it was hilarious. So, yeah,
incredible. Yeah, certainly wildlife is one of the most memorable things that I take from trips down there. Saunders, how about you? Were chatting a couple of days ago about that standout experience of seeing the Polaris star of the Endurance shipwreck coming into view 3,008 meters below the surface of the Weddell Sea. Try and tell us what happened around you on the ship when that moment happened, and how did you feel? What was going on?
You know, it's one of the most frequent questions that comes up, but it's interesting because, as I sort of alluded to, we really didn't know whether we were going to find it or not. It wasn't like we were, it was just a matter of keep searching and we'll find it. We didn't know if it was even there, if it had been broken up into a million pieces and was scattered all over the Southern Ocean. So actually, rather than kind of an overwhelming sense of joy or jubilation, it was pure relief that this had all been worth it. And it was there, and the story, everything went to the story. You know, all of the diary entries were completely correct, and it kind of, I think that's a really special part of it. Actually, was that it was so true to history, and then just the added benefit of its preservation being just unbelievable. In this, thankfully, for the Endurance Rex case, there's no wood-eating microorganisms in the Weddell Sea because there's no wood, so nothing's been evolved to eat it. So as a result, what we had was a ship that looked like it had been sunk yesterday.
Extraordinary. Well, those images certainly were unbelievable. Mark, can I come to you next? You've seen a lot of penguins, haven't you? You've seen a lot of penguins. I'm not going to ask what your favorite penguin is, because I know you want to give a shout out to humpback whales. So tell us a bit about the whale watching experience that's perhaps a little bit overlooked in Antarctica.
Yeah, it most definitely is. And going kind of later in the season, around February and March, is a really great time to see whales, because they're starting this incredible migration back towards the mid-latitudes, where they'll bring up and raise their calves. the first time I went down to Antarctica, it's a magical thing. When you first arrive, it'll generally be overnight. You'll wake up next morning, and there'll be maybe ice on the deck, snow on the rails, and you go outside and you're confronted by penguins porpoising past. You'll have this incredible sort of cold, frosty air, and maybe a blue sky and the shining landscape of snowscapes. And the very first time I went down was there were humpback whales in the water feeding on their side and splashing around the boat. They were all around the boat, and it was quite incredible. It's a fantastic place to see. You always see humpback whales. I've seen minke down there. I've seen beaked whales going down on the Bellinghausen seaside, and so there's a great opportunity to see them. I had the great privilege once also to work with a team of scientists for Woods Hole Institute. They piggybacked on a voyage going down to study humpback whales, and we spent literally 2 weeks just tracking humpback whales. That was the main focus of the wildlife, and they are a really spectacular animal, and very often they're breaching out of the water. So whales are they are an overlooked thing. Penguins tend to knock them off their perch, but I'll tell you what, actually back in February, when I was when the polar plunge was taking this, I mean, this is a true story. It might sound I'm making this up, but the polar plunge was taking place off the back. It was quite near Port Lockroy. People were throwing themselves in the water with gay abandon, and literally, I'd say 500 meters away from the ship, this humpback whale flew out of the water, breaching in the air, and flopped down and created this enormous wave. And it was completely, everybody had been watching the plungers going off the back of the ship, and everybody's long lens cameras turned to these whales, which were starting to breach out of the water. They've got a belly full of krill, and they're ready to head north. So that's an amazing experience. You will guarantee see whales on these voyages.
Wow, thanks, Mark. I don't know about any of the viewers listening, but this polar plunge thing is sounding less and less inviting to me. If there's humpbacks breaching as well, but no, what an incredible experience. Joe, let's drill down into more of the detail of when to go and the best times, because obviously, there's a fairly narrow window of opportunity for visiting Antarctica during the Austral summer, mid-October to March through to March. But you also have to take into account various other factors, don't you? Snow cover, penguin breeding seasons, whale watching season. Could you just sort of give us a brief month-by-month account so people get an idea of what month they might like to pick?
Yeah, sure. Well, to be honest, there's no bad month. You're going to see penguins whenever you go. And with the whales, yes, kind of the end of the season technically is better. But I went, my first time was February, but my second time was November, literally the very beginning of the season. And I actually then did do the Weddell Sea, and I saw one lonely emperor penguin all on his own. And so that was one of our highlights of the trip, but that was doing the Falklands and South Georgia. And I saw blue whale, orcas, minke, fin whale, humpbacks, everything. So yeah, so kind of November is the beginning of the season. So things are all happening. The penguins are all running around. They're all kind of getting their nests all ready. So there's a lot of activity, but because there was a lot of ice, we couldn't get down the other side. But actually, it was amazing kind of going into the Weddell Sea. And that is where we saw huge icebergs, like the big tabular icebergs. So it's a more adventurous time. There's more snow on the ground. So when you get into kind of middle of December onwards, when the chicks are all hatching, that's the optimum time when people want to go. So obviously prices are a little bit higher, but if you want to see chicks, that's when they're being hatched. So, lots of activity then with all the babies running around. And then once you get into kind of February time, the first time I went was then mid-February. So the chicks were then bigger, and they were just running around, utter chaos everywhere, trying to find their parents and bringing back the food from the mums and dads. So lots of activity, but then not a lot of snow on the ground. So you have the snow on the mountains, and obviously the icebergs are there the whole time, but not a lot of snow actually on the ground. So it's a lot less cleaner, shall we say, compared to November time. But yeah, any of those months, just absolutely incredible, and tons of wildlife.
Fantastic. Thanks, Joe. I'm staying with you, Joe. Okay, so people have an idea of when they want to go. Perhaps they're going to join the March expedition voyage down to the Weddell Sea with Saunders and Mark. What's next? How do they sort of start the process of planning and talking about what to do logistically for organising their trip?
Yeah, they can come talk to me
what
or one
you'd
of
say.
my team members. Yeah, so we've obviously got a wealth of knowledge between us. So like I said, I've done 2 trips and my colleagues have been down there as well. So yeah, it's a case of having a look at the website, seeing what you want to do. If you want to do the trip that these great guys are going on, or you want to have a look at the other dates, we have different variety of voyages. So we have our classic, we have crossing the circle, Falkland, South Georgia. Some fly-ins if people aren't too keen on doing the Drake Passage. It can be choppy. I've done it 3 times. It was choppy once. So, you know, sometimes it can be bad, sometimes it can be good. But yeah, you know, have a look at the website, get some ideas from there, have a chat with us, and yeah, we can put together packages. So with flights, with ground arrangements, anything that people want to do, extensions, anything like that, we can do all of that.
Brilliant. Yeah, there's nothing can really beat talking to a specialist who's actually been there, done that, experienced the ships and the place. So,
and
yeah,
I've seen the Greg
great
Mortimer
advice.
as well, which is beautiful. Sister
Ships
ships
do
with
look
Sylvia Earle.
amazing.
Yeah, Greg is lovely.
Yes, I should also point out that if you go to the Discover the World website, as well as all the information on different trips and itineraries, you'd also find lots of information on the blog about experiences and different aspects of Antarctica and the polar regions. There's also a digital magazine where you can find out more about best times to go, the different ships and so on. So dive into that and have a good look around. Saunders, can I come to you next? We've had a few interesting questions from viewers. Here's one from David who says, I've walked the last 5 miles of Shackleton's trek to Stromness on South Georgia. This is David, not me. And I was tired. How could the 4 of them have had enough energy to complete their trek and be saved?
It is a fascinating question that, you know, I'm almost glad I don't know the answer, because it's such an important part of the mystery. You know, I don't know how they did the ocean voyage in the James Caird. I don't know how they got to Elephant Island. I don't know how they made it off the ice. When I was down there in the conditions myself, every moment I thought, I don't know how they did this with none of the technology and none of the equipment that we have now. So that's part of the mystery. I mean, there was a few things they did to try and make it easier, like they put nails through their boots, sort of make kind of makeshift crampons. They, you know, a good one of Shackleton's kind of most his biggest legacies, his leadership. So kind of keeping it helped that the 3 that actually did the crossing, it kind of got narrowed down, and they left a few on the Harken Bay side of South Georgia, were Tom Crean, who had done multiple expeditions beforehand, one of Ireland's greatest explorers, if not Ireland's greatest explorer, hugely celebrated. He's got a statue in his own pub in Ireland, which you can go visit, and Worsley himself. So he had the good navigator, and he had someone that he'd done expeditions with. Someone was very polar knowledgeable, so he had a good crew to do it with. But there's a great story at the end, and it's kind of maybe relevant to the last few miles for David's question, is that there is a great part of the story where they heard the whistle, the steam whistle of Stromness. And with nothing left in the tank, just completely energy drained, very little food, just they knew survival was there. They could hear it. So they famously decided to slide their way down the final part of the mountain, which could have gone very wrong, and it could have been the end of the story right there. But it showed you where they were. But long answer for a short question. I don't know, but I wish I did.
Yeah, it is extraordinary what they went through, and to have that final burst of energy just to get the will to survive, I guess, just keeps you going for that last little bit. Yeah, Mark, you talked brilliantly about life on an expedition and the citizen science aspect, which is absolutely fascinating. I think viewers would also be interested in knowing more about the environmental aspects of some of these new ships. Particularly from operators like Aurora Expeditions, AE Expeditions, the Sylvia Earle, the Greg Mortimer with these wonderful inverted bows. Can you sort of shed a bit more light on what it's like to be on these ships and how they do take the environment seriously into account when they're traveling down there? Well, I think you're muted, Mark. Just put your microphone on.
Sorry, I've got quite a lot of bird song now outside. So there's definitely some parrots here. There's something called the maroon back parrot. So it's very, very loud. Yeah, for sure. The ships they take their responsibility to the Antarctic and Arctic environment seriously. And as you said, it has these wonderful inverted bows known as the X bow. And this is a way of creating fuel efficiency. They move through the water, there's less resistance, and so the fuel goes much, much further. I think also at the level of citizen science programs, as I said, the Sylvia Earle has this laboratory on board whereby it's a great point to start in terms of carrying out the research, and all the staff are allocated different actual aspects of to go out and do science projects, and you can join in and do everything. Also, on a typical day, you might be the tannoy might announce the bird survey is taking place, and that's very important. You go up to the top deck, hang on if it's really rough to whatever you can hold on to keep upright, and record for 30 minutes the number of seabirds. So it's very important to know what's flying, where, and at what latitude. That's hugely important. There's, as I said, there's the microplastic survey, the cloud survey that's sponsored by NASA, and that's a science research project looking at the impact of global warming on the polar regions, and what the weather patterns and how the weather patterns are changing. So there's, these are modern functional ships. They're not rust buckets. They're not. They've brought in new technology to actually make them a cleaner and healthier voyage, and sharing citizen science with anybody who's on board is really, really important.
I'm just going to add to that, William, just because I just experienced an expedition in northeast Greenland, and one thing I was really blown away by is one of the expedition crew provided on the ship was a PhD geologist. So he, in terms of learning about science and learning about geology and the places that you were, there's so much you can really take away from the expedition crew themselves. And one of the things he was running us through as well on the citizen science side of the thing is the Happy Whale project, which is if you photograph the kind of the tail of a whale as it's going into the water, that's kind of its fingerprint. That's how you identify who or what a whale is. And when you upload this to this database, it tells you where that whale's been seen before, and you can track it around the world. Well, the really fun thing is if it hasn't been seen before, you get to name it. So it's another one of the other parts of the citizen science projects. But yeah, I was blown away by how much goes on board.
Yeah, citizen science projects are so important. One of the things that struck me about your talk, Mark, was we've mentioned the fact that these ships are small. They're not thousands of passengers. There's maybe 100 or 200, sometimes even less than that. So you're not inundating these very fragile shorelines with lots of people. And I was particularly interested that when you were seeing all these Adelie penguins on the shoreline, they were so crammed on the shoreline that you weren't landing. The Zodiacs weren't going ashore because that disturbed them. They were going just along the shore to give you, and that's sort of really sensitive, thoughtful wildlife viewing out there, isn't it?
Yeah, you're very well briefed throughout, not to get too close, to maintain 5 meters distance in terms of certain species if it's a nesting penguins, further. So you're constantly being reminded that you need to not enter an area where there's a sensitive, particularly breeding or egg raising or chick raising going on. So it's really, really important you follow those rules, and it's an enjoyable experience, whatever. So you have your long lens cameras, you have your binoculars, and you get a chance to observe these animals very, very close. But throughout, there was fantastic regulations, and certainly any whale encounters, the ship will park itself and be as far away as it possibly can. And although quite often, last February on the Sylvia Earle, I was sort of working at my desk and had my slide in my sort of door open and for the outside world, and I heard this tremendous sound. And I just went out to the balcony, looked down, and there was a humpback whale, literally out the water, floating alongside the ship, pressed against the hull. And I'm looking right down on it. I can see down into its blowhole. And so sometimes, for all the will in the world of trying to keep a safe distance away from wildlife, sometimes it comes to you, and it can be extraordinary. So there's no legislating for that.
That's brilliant. What a story. Joe, we've had a couple of questions in from viewers. One about solo travelers. Can I go on an expedition on my own, on a voyage on my own? And one about people who are worried about, getting into zodiacs, perhaps you've got limited mobility, that sort of thing. Could you shed some light on those two things for us?
Sure. Yeah. So kind of people traveling by themselves, a couple of options. So you can either be matched up with somebody of the same sex. So if you are happy to share with somebody, some of the ships have quad cabins, triple cabins, twin cabins. So then you avoid any single supplements with it with that way. And then other ships will actually have a specific single cabin. So it's just literally for one person. So then there's a special price for that. And then sometimes we have some offers of solo prices. So sometimes it'll be no single supplement. So it depends on the ship and the dates and things like that. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I've always gone on these voyages by myself and been matched up with other people. And the thing is with these trips that everybody's like-minded. They love wildlife, they love scenery, traveling, they've got all these stories to share. And it's always worked out really well because everybody, is there to have this amazing time. You're not in your cabin that much. You are there to experience the outside world and getting off the ship as many times as possible. So, whether you're traveling by yourself or traveling with other people, you're going to have an amazing time. And then, second question was to do with, just remind me.
But people are worried about mobility issues.
Mobility, yeah. So some ships themselves will have a lift, but you have to have some form of mobility because getting in and out of the Zodiacs isn't the easiest thing, but you do have the crew members there to help you. So they do the special arm where they hold that out and you grip onto it, and they would help you into and out of the Zodiac. But unfortunately for people who are completely immobile, these aren't suitable because especially when you're doing things like crossing the Drake Passage, it can be rough, so that the ship can be moving around. You need to be able to hold on and that kind of thing. So it depends. You don't have to be extremely fit. These trips are kind of for average fitness. With going to Antarctica, there's not a huge amount of walking either. Sometimes you could just literally go to the landing site and sit down for an hour or whatever, 2 hours, and just watch the same penguins if you want to. But yeah, the Zodiacs, they're always there to help. They can be a little bit unsteady, but for everybody, standard fitness, you'll be fine, and standard mobility.
Brilliant. Thank you, Jo. Well, our time is nearly up. I just wanted to bring sort of the conclusion of this evening's presentation back to the Weddell Sea, this wonderful place we've been hearing about. And just ask each of you if viewers are sort of just teetering on the edge of deciding whether to go to the Weddell Sea, to go on this once in a lifetime trip out to Antarctica, but push down into the Weddell Sea on this quite remarkable trip. In just the one or two lines, how would you convince them? What would be your selling point to them about joining this trip? Saunders, perhaps I could come to you first.
Yeah. I mean, aside from all the experiences that we've shared and having the chance of being able to experience them themselves, this is a truly remote part of the world, and one of the I don't want to over exaggerate, but few remaining travelable on a ship like this parts of the world that's that remote. So why wouldn't you is the question. It's easier for me to say what is it about it that you don't want to see than it is for me to say here's the things you should see, because it's a truly remarkable place in the world. The experiences will sit with you for a lifetime. They definitely have with me, and I already can't wait to go back. In fact, I'll better that the moment we left the ice last March, I was already thinking, how am I going to get back here? Because I was getting withdrawal symptoms whilst I was actually still there.
That's great. Yes, why wouldn't you go? Indeed. Mark, what about you?
I think obviously wildlife is a very important factor, but I think in particular for the Weddell Sea, because of its infamy regarding expeditions past and some of the disasters that have befallen those people who've traveled there and survived, it's actually you get this palpable sense of history, of the ghosts of the past. And I absolutely love that. And that in particular, this voyage, that the Northern Skuld part of the story, the Swedish scientist, is incredible. It's an incredible escape, another incredible escape, and an endurance of the hardiness of these past people and how they existed and what they did to stay alive and escape. And actually, you'll feel that when you go into the Weddell Sea. You don't get that as glorious as it is on the other side of the peninsula, the Bellinghausen Sea, it's the Weddell Sea, which has this air of tough mystery about it. And it's really palpable feeling the presence of these past explorers and scientists who spent so much time there, often involuntary.
Thank you, Mark. Joe, last word to you.
Yeah, I think it's just being so remote, and because a lot of the other ships will generally all go the other way. This area, not a lot of them go, and it's the huge icebergs, the massive tabular icebergs. That was what kind of struck me on that side, and just the complete remoteness, and you don't see anybody else really in that area. So it's definitely the more adventurous side, should we say.
Brilliant. Thank you, Joe. Well, thank you to all our viewers for your excellent questions. If we haven't managed to answer yours this evening, apologies, we are running out of time, but somebody at Discover the World will be sending out a follow-up email with further information after this webinar. I hope everyone joining us has found this useful. I've certainly been inspired. It's just been incredible to find out about this extraordinary region. And also hope you found it useful for planning your next polar small ship expedition voyage, whether you're looking to go on the Weddell Sea voyage with AE Expeditions next March, or perhaps plan a late availability trip to Antarctica this season, or a summer trip to the Arctic next year, or even, it's not too early to start planning for the 24-25 Antarctic season. Don't forget, you can find out lots more on the Discover the World website, and take advantage of those really quite amazing discounts, 20% offers running until the end of this month. So the best way forward after that is to give one of Discover the World's travel specialists a call, maybe schedule a video appointment with them, or pop down and mull over a map of Antarctica with Joe in the offices down in Dorking in Surrey. There really is nothing better than speaking to an expert who's actually been there and can give you unbiased advice, tailor-made to suit your exact requirements. So just remember, these are seriously special trips, and you want to get them right, so it's worth talking to experts. Just want to round up now by saying a huge thank you to Saunders, to Mark for their inspiring talks, and to Jo, of course, for her brilliant words of wisdom. And a special thank you to you two for joining us this evening. Happy voyaging, take care, keep safe, and look forward to hearing from you soon. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you.